Thank you for being here this afternoon. I realize some of you in the room are here for the medical waste program, and I'm not going to do any of that. I've tried, and I just can't handle hospitals, so I'm going to stay out of the medical waste department. The following's from the U.S. Government Peace Corps Manual for volunteers who work in the Amazon jungle. It tells what to do in case you're attacked by an anaconda. We're all clear on the size of an anaconda. It's the largest snake in the world, relative to the boa constrictor, and grows 35 feet in length and weighs between 300 and 400 pounds at the maximum. This is what the manual says to do for the Peace Corps, and they're getting themselves ready to go to some mission around the world. If you're attacked by an anaconda, do not run. The snake is faster than you are. Number 2, lie flat on the ground, put your arms tight against your sides, your legs tight against one another. Number 3, tuck your chin in. Number 4, the snake will come and begin to nudge and climb over your body. Do not panic. Don't panic. Number 5, after the snake has examined you, it will begin to swallow you from the feet and always from that end. Permit the snake to swallow your feet and ankles. Again, do not panic. Apparently, the anaconda can sense your fear and anxiety, and that tends to up its own heart rate, and so it's best not to do that. Number 7, the snake will now begin to suck your legs into its body. You must lie perfectly still. This will take a long time. When the snake has reached your knees, slowly and with as little movement as possible, reach down, take your knife, and very gently slide it into the side of the snake's mouth between the edge of its mouth and your leg. Then suddenly pull upward, severing the snake's head. Please note, be sure you have your knife. Number 2, be sure your knife is sharp. And I read that today because, well, it's somewhat funny. But I think more importantly, it's because I think one of the things that we all need on a regular basis is the ongoing sharpening of our skills around leadership. And I think it's really important sometimes, and we've already had a keynote today about it, but it's really important that we take the time to give attention to think about, to understand how to get better at what we do. We heard from Liz Wiseman this morning talking about, are you a multiplier? And how are you multiplying your capabilities? And, you know, I don't know about you, but I heard some really good stuff this morning. This is the one that I think stuck with me the most from her session this morning, which was go from being the idea guy with all the answers to becoming the extreme questions guy. Did any of you like that one where she talked about changing the whole focus to, instead of being the answer person, to actually being the one who is constantly asking questions and being actually extreme about that? My job today is really just to provide a sharpening stone. And I can only do it from the perspective of that which I've learned myself, that which I've experienced, the kinds of things that I've learned, the kind of things I've tried to understand over time. And the lessons I've learned are just mine, but I hope that in the work that we do today for the next hour, that some of the lessons I've learned and some of the understanding I have of leadership will be something that you can take and do something with in your own business and with your own company. As I live in this industry, as you do, these are just some of the things I'm seeing. There's changes in the core business. We, I think, all acknowledge that the box business is evolving. What once was the most stable part of it is still a very stable part of it, but we acknowledge there's a lot of things going on. There's rapid technology advancements in what we're doing. There's consolidations. There's evolving of our services and the addition of services to add to what we're already doing. There is business sophistication that we're having to continually improve on. There's marketplace requirements that are demanding things of us. More and more every day, this industry is facing the need, I believe, for leaders. Not just in the large industry, not just in the large companies, but in every local organization, in every large company. We need leaders who are leading both their own businesses and leading this industry. And I think it's important to talk about that because As I talk to people on a regular basis and what I do as a coach, as a consultant, as an advisor, what I keep hearing is what's happening. I get asked, well, what's happening out there? What are other people doing? And what I am aware of and what becomes very evident to me is that the people that seem to internally have a level of confidence to them about where this industry is going are really leading the charge in their own businesses and trying to make unique and different things happen. So when we think about that, what is this thing called leadership? How do we define it? How do we understand the role we play? Liz really helped us to see an element of leadership this morning, but I want to step back even further and go, what is this thing called leadership? And as I think about it, I recognize that history is full of people who have tried to figure out this thing called leadership. From Plato, and Plato really spent a lot of time in his Republic document trying to understand the role he played. Sun Tzu, and really as he thought about leadership from the perspective of war and the role the general played in war, really helped to understand and create context for leadership in that particular field. And Sun Tzu is still someone that many people to this day read. Machiavelli, in his Prince, his book about the Prince, talks about the 5 things that he perceives in leadership. And these guys have hundreds and hundreds of years ago talking about leadership, right up to some of today's most eloquent thinkers about leadership. Ken Blanchard and his different styles of leadership for situational situations. Peter Drucker, The Effective Executive. How many have read that book, Effective Executive? Henry Mintzberg, who is really one of the most current leading thinkers on management and the role that managers play in organizations. The thinking around leadership continues and continues to this day. But there's the academic side of it, and then there's the people that we've watched and observed in the world who inevitably just are leaders. And even though we can't necessarily dig in and define what it is they do, we know it when we see it. We understand that these kinds of people have made a huge imprint on history, from Nelson Mandela to Gandhi to Martin Luther King. These large political figures have changed nations and changed the world. And then we think about business leaders who have somehow completely changed the way we operate in our world, from Jobs to Buffett, and even to Branson, and just the ways of thinking that these business leaders operate in. And what's so cool about watching them is recognizing that if they can do it, there are some elements of what they do, there are some situations where we might be able to follow them. So what is this thing? What is the thing that these people all have? Well, strangely, I don't think there's any one thing, but I think there's a complexity of things that really come to bear on the situation you're in. They come to bear on the culture and the context and your own particular experience, and all those kind of things all start showing up when you think about leadership. But here's what we do know for sure. Sometimes it's not anything to do with the fact that you're an executive. Just because you're an executive does not necessarily mean you're a leader or even a good leader. Yes, you have a title and yes, you have a role, but you might not be a good leader. You could be an owner, you could be an entrepreneur. Seniority doesn't necessarily mean leadership. The role often is required to be one of a leader, but doesn't mean you are a good one. Title, position, even the attributes you have don't necessarily make leadership really define it. So what is it? Well, I tried to go into many of the significant thinkers, more of the significant thinkers, and see what did they say about leadership. Well, Warren Bennis, who is often referred to as the dean of leadership thinkers, he said leadership is the capacity to translate vision into reality. So vision, something that we see, and bring that into reality. Henry Kissinger, he had an interesting statement about that. The task of a leader is to get his people from where they are to where they have not been. So there's something about not only having vision, but moving people in a direction that they've never been before. My late great uncle, John Quincy Adams, if your actions inspire others to dream more, to learn more, to do more, to become more, you are a leader. So there's this essence in leadership of actually having some kind of influence on the people you're leading. How many have seen, heard, read John Maxwell stuff? John Maxwell really, this seems to be the statement that resonates from John Maxwell. Leadership is ultimately influence. It's your ability to influence another or a group of others. But Kevin Kruse, who writes in Forbes magazine, I think has created, is a former entrepreneur, but I think I like his definition because it clarifies it nicely. Leadership is a process of social influence which maximizes the efforts of others towards the achievement of a goal. Leadership is the process of social influence. So there's some kind of influence that a leader has on others in a social environment which maximizes their efforts. So this influence that I'm delivering or you're delivering has to somehow affect the effort of others, and it's always, or it tends to be, in relationship to the achievement of a goal. Do you like that? I feel like that's a good one that you can kind of wrap your head around. And so there's social influence, there's the effort of others, and there's the achievement of a goal. And when those come together and you're the one doing the influence, then you are, in a way, the leader. So if that's the case, and we live in this environment of the changes, the sophistication that's demanded of us, the technology advancements, the services, the consolidation, all this stuff going on in our world, I believe that your job as a leader is to influence a group of people, and in many cases, the team, the business, the people that work in your business. In our case, in this room, we're business people, and we're leading companies, we're leading organizations, and it's your job to actually influence this team of people towards the goal, whether that be business growth, new sales, better operational performance. Creating a better result is ultimately the goal. But that's where I think we have the opportunity to shine. And that's where I think in our world right now, we have the opportunity to do something very cool. So given that as a foundation, then as I think about leadership, one of the things I try and do is actually construct a mental model for myself. And mental models, and I learned this whole concept from Buffett and, not Jimmy, the other Buffett, but Warren Buffett and his team have really created this mechanism whereby they look at the world through mental models. And if you have a chance to learn some of those, they're really kind of cool because you come into every situation, and I think you all do this. We all do this naturally. We have a mental model of how we look at a particular situation in order to help us define it, help us figure it out. 80-20, Pareto principle, is a mental model that's used for many people as a way to help understand how things operate or how things work. And when I think about a mental model for leadership, I tend to think about it in quadrants. I tend to think about it as a set of 4 quadrants as it relates to the complexity of leadership, because leadership as a topic and leadership as an activity has this whole range of stuff going on. So here's how I think about it. The first quadrant that I think about is objectives and strategy. It's often what's typically referred to as the real big leadership aspect. So objectives and strategy, what are we trying to accomplish in the world? The second one is the execute and manage quadrant. And the execute and manage quadrant is where we get things done. So if objectives and strategy are sort of the big picture kind of stuff that leaders take, execute and manage is the implementation phase of that. Peter Drucker said that management is doing the right things, so it's doing the things right. Management is doing things right. Leadership, or the objectives and strategy stuff, is doing the right things. So that's the distinction between the two. The third quadrant that I tend to think about is development and deployment of others. And really, when I think about quadrants, and I listened to Liz this morning, this is the quadrant she was spending a lot of her time talking about, right? It was really about how do you create your staff, your team, the people that you work for, to actually bring the best of themselves to the equation. And that's really this quadrant. It's how do you get them to think differently? And then finally, the final quadrant that I see in all leadership materials lives in this one, self-leadership and mastery. It's the part of it that when you read about leaders, you read about their integrity and you read about how they think and how they operate and their self-awareness and their ability to influence and how they actually operate in the world. And so as I think about this whole concept of leadership and I look at it and I try and understand it, those are the 4 quadrants I see. But then, just to add a little bit of complexity to it, because there's nothing really quite simple, and I want it to be simple, but it's not. Within each quadrant, I see this cluster of capabilities and this cluster of abilities that affect each one. And today, what I want to do is just pick out some of the really cool ones I've learned, I've experienced, I've seen in this last year that I think can be really helpful to you. So let's start in the top left quadrant, the objectives and strategy. And objectives and strategy to me is that real sense of where are we going? What are we trying to accomplish? What's the big vision? And so when you think about those, some of those things in that, some of that cluster of capabilities in objectives and strategy is the ability to make decisions. It's how fast of change are we going to make in this organization? Do we have the right people? Jim Collins' whole thing about are the right people on the bus? That's an essence of objectives and strategy. I love this one, reversing natural entropy. In our organizations, our staff and our team are often slowing down. And the job of a leader is to reverse that, is to keep that so that we're constantly moving forward. Court vision. Court vision is a thing that leaders have to have as it relates to strategy, that ability to see what's going on in their business, but also in the world outside of themselves. So when I think about the different activities that live within this objectives and strategies phase, I see this cluster of activities. But I want to talk to you specifically about 2 that I think are critically important to you in this particular quadrant. And this is the first one. Jack Welch of GE said, good business leaders create a vision, articulate the vision, passionately own the vision, and relentlessly drive it to completion. So what is that? What is that vision? What is it? I mean, we read this and well, what is the vision? What's vision all about? Anyone? Right, it's how we want the world to look in the future. That's great, yes. Anyone else have, I love that. It's the how we as entrepreneurs, as business leaders, as leaders of any kind want to see the future. Jonathan Swift said it in a really kind of interesting way. Vision is the art of seeing the invisible. And entrepreneurs and business owners are exceptionally good at that, is what's out there that I can create? What kind of value can I create in the world? What can I build out there that is going to actually change our business, change the world, change something? So seeing the invisible. Ben Zander, who is a conductor, said this: it's one of the characteristics of a leader that he not doubt for one moment the capacity of the people he's leading to realize whatever he's dreaming. So part of actually getting a result as a leader is to actually have a vision, but then have your people do it. And I think that's what Liz was talking about this morning, that ability to take this vision that we believe and have in ourselves and then get it through to these people that we lead in order for them to make it happen. And that's really important. So the question for you around your vision is, where do you want to go? What do you want to achieve? What is the dream? What do you want to create in the world? And in the coaching work that I do and in the consulting work I do, here's one of the things that keeps showing up for me, is that leaders, entrepreneurs, and owners are either one of two things are happening. Either they have not clearly defined what that vision is and what the objective end results, or at least the next stage is, they've not clearly defined it, or they haven't defined it for their team. So it lives in their head as kind of this obsession, but it's never clearly articulated as a vision to the team that they're leading. So the first question is, do you know where you're going? Do you have a clear definition of the outcome you wish to achieve? Do you have a very clear understanding of what that looks like, what it measures like, what's the end result going to be? What does it look like if you achieve it? What are the indicators? What are the leading indicators of that occurring? And then how are you articulating it to your team? Because it's one thing to have it, it's quite another thing to actually articulate it in a way that they can absolutely grab onto it and work with it. So the question is, how are you articulating it? How are you getting it out there? And for me, that becomes so critical, because if I can't give it to my team, if the people that I'm talking to in my business don't really get a sense for what I'm trying to accomplish, they have no way of doing it. They just come in and go to work instead of actually work on something that means something to them. This is from Alice in Wonderland. You might have read it years ago, but there's the cat, and the Cheshire Cat is talking to Alice, and she says, "Would you tell me please which way I ought to go from here?" And the cat says, "That depends a good deal on where you want to get to." And Alice goes, "I don't much care where." Then it doesn't matter which way you go. And so if you're not clear on where you're going, how to get there loses its value. Does that make sense? And so often, I know we believe it, and I know intellectually we go, yeah, that makes sense. The problem is, so often when you actually talk to people and you hear what they're saying to their staff, this is not clear. What their staff believe, it doesn't matter which way we go, because I'm not really clear where we're going. So when we have the ability to articulate where we're going, we can create a better result. Okay. So within objectives and strategy, within this quadrant, there's another one that this year has, to me, become critically important, and I think it's critically important in your business too, and it's this: culture. Culture. Tony Hsieh, you've heard of Zappos, no doubt. Zappos is known for its culture, but Tony Hsieh talks about their number one priority as a company's culture. Our whole belief is that if you get the culture right, most of the other stuff like delivering great customer service or building a long-term enduring brand will just happen naturally on its own. A culture is becoming more and more important as you grow a business, as you grow a company, and culture is one of the most important things a leader can do. Jeff Bezos from Amazon says, "Our culture is friendly and intense, but push comes to shove, we'll settle for intense." And if you work and read and hear about what happens at Amazon, what you know is intensity is what they're all about. Intensity and bringing things to market, intensity and pushing things, making that product get to you the next day. Whatever they're doing, they're all about intensity. And if you hear about Jeff Bezos' meetings, it's all about intensity. You don't come to a meeting if you're not prepared. You get kicked out, you get yelled out of his meetings. But he's built that kind of culture in his business that allows them to continue to perform. Rob Berkeley, who is a leading executive coach in the world, talks about this: as a leader, you are always responsible for the culture of your organization. Until you set your executive standards in place, you get your employee standards. Until you set them, until you set culture, your employees define culture. Emergent cultures, hear me on this one, emergent cultures are terrifying. So, you know when you don't clean out your fridge for a few months? You know, the something in the back of the fridge inevitably creates a culture of its own. It's not monitored, it's not managed, it's just lying in the back and you'd prefer not to look at it. But then one day you open the drawer or you pull stuff out around it and you find this emergent culture. And it's kind of gross, and it kind of, it creates some havoc in you. But what happens in our businesses is we leave things happening in the back recesses of our corporate environment, our staff, and these emergent cultures start happening. And they're cultures that are emergent because they grow on their own, because you have not created and made explicit the culture you want in place. And so what you don't want to have as a leader is an emergent culture. What you want to have is an explicit culture. So how do you create an explicit culture? And this, I think, is very, very important. Tony Hsieh at Zappos actually fires if you don't fit the culture. It's not if you don't have the skill set, it's if you don't have the culture. He'll train a skill set as long as it's within reason, but they'll fire based on wrong culture. So how do you create the right one? How to create an explicit culture, I believe, starts with defining clearly your virtues and your values. And your virtues and your values, virtues are those underlying non-negotiables that have to happen in your environment. Virtues are those baseline life types of choices that you want to be made in your environment. Values are the things that matter to you. So virtues are more like your belief system. Values are what get you up in the morning. And they have to come from the leader. Because if they don't come from you, and you don't help to shape that and you don't make it explicit, then what will grow is whatever you want it to be. The third one is standards. So what kind of level of culture do you want to have, and what do those standards look like? How do you want things done specifically that really relate to culture? And then I think you have to write it down. If you can't write down what your culture is and what it's about, and you don't write it down, it's very hard to live it. And I've talked to a lot of people who have cultures in their business, but they don't define it. They don't really clearly define it. They hope it's caught. And elements of culture are definitely caught. But what you want is it very clear and precise. And then the only way you can sort of move that needle is you have to talk about it. You have to talk about culture. One of the things Becky and I do in the business every week with our staff is we talk culture. Every Friday during our staff meeting is also a culture conversation. This last week, we actually spent almost 45 minutes talking about how we deliver and how we engage our values and our virtues as we deliver email back and forth. So we live in an email-driven world, and so often how that email goes out and what we say and the tone of those emails is a huge part of culture. But if you never talk about it, you only get what your staff think are appropriate. You getting that? This is critical. And then I think finally, one of the things that you start doing is you hire for people that fit your culture. So you don't just hire just only the person who has the right skill set. You hire the person with the right skill set and who mirrors and matches the culture that you want. It's culture that actually gets you frustrated a lot of times when they don't align with yours. So for me, one of the most important leadership things you can do from a strategic kind of thinking is make sure your culture's right. So is your culture explicit? What are you doing to make sure your culture's explicit? What are the kinds of activities you as the leader in your business are doing on a regular basis to ensure that your staff understand and know the kind of culture you want to have? And then finally, how do you know that they're doing it? How do you know that they're getting your cultural stuff? You can observe it, but one of the things I find, one of the ways you know your culture that you want, the explicit culture you want on your staff, comes from hearing them talk about it. When your staff talk about the culture that you want, then some good things happen. Any questions on that? Does that make sense? Is that helpful? Okay. Let's go to the second quadrant. The second quadrant is execute and manage. And these are things like standards compliance, financial management, human resources, scheduling, operations management, planning, resource deployment. It's all the kind of things that get things done in your organization. Those are the kind of things that happen in this quadrant, and those are the cluster, a small cluster of the things. So we could spend some time on standards and financial management. We could spend some time on those things, but there's two things that I have particularly found helpful this last year that I hope these will be very helpful to you as well. The first one is standard operating procedures. Standard operating procedures. We call them SOPs in our business. A lot of people do, but Sam Carpenter has been a real huge help with us as it relates to this. He's got a great book. If you want to read a great book, it's called Work the System. Work the System. I had Sam on my RimPro report last year. If you go to rimproreport.com, you can search under Sam Carpenter, and great show where he talks about his whole thinking around building standard operating procedures into your business. Your job is not to be a fire killer in your business. Your job is to prevent fires. And the only way to prevent fires is have adequate and appropriate standard operating procedures. Now, I realize in our industry we have standard operating procedures. And I think in many of the countries around the world who have adopted the ISO standards and all that, we're very clear on that. We're getting better at standard operating procedures. So we're building this capability to know what's the next step in any process, what's the next thing that should be done, is there a checklist involved? But one of the cool things that Sam Carpenter talks about is really you get excited if you're in a standard operating environment when things do go wrong, because you realize it's a chance to improve your systems. So a lot of times if you're getting freaked out about things going wrong, what happens when you're in a standard operating environment, you actually start finding the things that make you even better when you've got standard operating procedures. Edwards Deming talked about this: 94% of all failures result of the system, not the people. Now, he was a manufacturing guy, and we don't live in a manufacturing world, but he was very clear that if you created an appropriate and effective system, then when things go wrong, don't always blame people. Blame the system and go, how can we fix the system? And if things keep going wrong, don't always go back to the person and say, you're doing it wrong. See if there's a way to find where the system went wrong or what went wrong with it. Anybody read E-Myth from Michael Gerber? E-Myth Revisited? E-Myth Revisited is a book about moving out of an entrepreneurial kind of thinking and to really grow bigger companies. And Michael Gerber talks about this: organize around business functions, not people. Then build systems with each of those functions. Let the systems run the business and the people run the systems. People come and go, but the systems remain constant. And why this becomes important, I think, is because what it does is takes your business into a really stable operation. And I think the larger companies in the room obviously have done tons of work on this. This is the kind of things that allows you to build big companies, is have stable systems. But I'm encouraging those of you who are in smaller businesses or smaller operating units to start figuring out how to create standard operating procedures to make your business operation more stable. So I think we all get that. But one of the things that I think is incredibly helpful to leaders, and sometimes we miss this piece. We know how to do it in our business, but we don't often back up and do it for our lives, for the work that we do personally, for the kind of life we have personally. So do you have standard operating procedures for the myriad of recurring events and tasks that happen in your day-to-day life? And this is one of the things we've been working on in our business. It's one thing to have standard operating procedures for the operational environment. It's quite a different thing to start creating standard operating procedures for what happens in your life every day. So when you show up at the office, and I'm just going to give you an example of one of the things that we've done. I do monthly coaching calls with clients. And what happens is we schedule times to talk and we communicate. And I just printed it off before I came yesterday. And we have just to ensure that somebody is scheduled on my calendar for a coaching call, we have a 4-page standard operating procedure document. Now, this is not to brag, but what I'm telling you is this makes my life infinitely easier. Because when I have a client that I'm trying to schedule a call with, all that happens is the system goes into play. And when something goes wrong with the system, we go back and what was missed? What item on the checklist was missed? And what begins to happen is we see this in our operations, we see good things happening out there, but what we fail to do as leaders sometimes is create systems for our own personal stuff. And it's when you do that, all of a sudden you start to see these opportunities emerge, because instead of getting stuck in minutia with our lives, we're actually seeing results, and we're actually able to do what is best for us to do and focus on the good stuff. So standard operating procedures are fabulous in your business. They're even more effective when they work on your day-to-day business life, and even more so in the rest of your life. They work really well at home too. I have standard operating procedures for going grocery shopping. That's a little bit weird, but I'm a little bit of a freak with that. Next, and this is still in the area of getting things done, and the management side of the equation, measurement becomes very helpful. Measurement is the first step that leads to control and eventually to improvement. If you can't measure something, you can't understand it. It's just fuzz. If you can't understand it, you can't control it. If you can't control it, you can't improve it. And I know many of you in this room, just by watching people who've walked in, I know many of you are exceptionally good at measurement. And you do a lot of measurement, and it's measurement that actually creates effective results for us. The things that get measured are the things that get done. The things that get measured are the things that get done. And I think in today's world, with all the executive dashboards and the kind of big data that's beginning to be collected in the world, and undoubtedly is being collected in your own organization, that big data is all about gaining accurate measurement to make good decisions about how your business is going to operate, how it's going to flow, how it's going to improve. So the question is, what are you actively measuring? There's a lot of value in measuring leading indicators, not just lagging ones. And this is the point that I want to make today, specific to this. I think we're very adept at measuring how much new business came in, how many boxes we have on shelves, what was our attrition rate, what was the financial implications of that, so what was our gross, what was our profit, what was all the things that showed up that an accountant would help us understand. Where I see a lot of opportunity is in what I call the leading indicators. So lagging indicators are the ones that show up on the books, show up in the things that you pass forward or up the hierarchy, or you make decisions about your business on. So how many new boxes? Leading indicators are the things that drive stuff in advance, that have to happen in order for new business to come. And so one of the things that I try and do with both my clients and myself is track not just the lagging indicators, but the leading ones. So how many times did I speak in front of an audience? That has nothing to do with the business I get. It's everything to do with getting the opportunity to speak and to talk to people. So that's a leading indicator for me. Business is a lagging indicator, getting new business. In a sales environment or in a marketing environment, how many actual direct mail pieces went out the door? A lot of times we measure how many new clients show up, but we're not always measuring the front end indicators. How many letters went out the door? How many postcards went out the door? How many contacts were made? All of those kind of leading indicators drive a result in the end. And so measurement, if you're actively measuring the lagging stuff, I would encourage you to also think about the leading indicators, which can be very effective for you. So we got two quadrants looked at. We've looked at the bigger issues related to leadership, so the strategic side. We've looked at the management and execution side, and now the third quadrant, which I think is very helpful. And Liz spent a lot of time on this morning, so I don't want to spend a lot of time here, but I've learned some cool stuff that I want to share. There's this whole concept called unique ability, and I think she touched on it today. But I think there's some really cool stuff related to unique ability. Harvey Firestone said the growth and development of people is the highest calling of leadership. The growth and development of people. Well, this to me is where you get some really cool stuff to happen. So when you can connect what Liz talked about this morning, getting the highest intelligence from your staff, and you add that with unique ability, something starts to really happen. Unique ability is the essence of what you love to do and do best. It's a superior ability that other people notice and value. You are passionate about using it and want to as much as possible. It's energizing, and there's a never-ending sense of improvement with it. Do you know those kind of things in your life that you just can't get enough of, and you love doing it, and you love figuring it out, and you love seeing how to evolve it just one more step? One of the cool things you can do in developing your people is figure out what that is for them. What are they passionate about? What are they excited about? What are they really good at? And you kind of start managing these pieces together to let them display their unique ability. Leadership is about making others better as a result of your presence and making sure that impact lasts in your absence. That's Harvard Business School definition of leadership. But what I love about it is it's really focused on making them better. And I think a lot of times making them better is allowing their uniqueness to show up, the best of what they have to offer to show up. Gallup did a survey. In the workplace, when an organization's leadership fails to focus on individual strengths, the odds of an employee being engaged are a dismal 1 in 11. So 10%. But when an organization's leadership focuses on the strengths of its employees, the odds soar to almost 3 in 4, 73%. So what Gallup discovered, and this is from the book Go Know Your Strengths, what they discovered in this whole leadership survey was when you're focusing on people and their unique ability, the strengths they have, the abilities they have, and you allow them to deploy that in your organization to help achieve your goals. But when it's their kind of stuff, the amazing thing is you get an 8 times return on that investment in figuring out the strengths of your people. Isn't that cool? I mean, like Liz talked about this morning, the astronomical benefit of actually letting your employees bring the best of their brains to your workplace and to what you're trying to accomplish. What Gallup discovered was when you let people bring the best of their strength to your organization, like the change is dramatic. 8 times return on that. They just bring much more to the table. And I know I do. When I'm getting to do the best of what I love to do, that's when my passion about it is really high. Benjamin Disraeli, British Prime Minister, said this: the greatest good you can do for another is not just share your riches, but reveal to him his own. Isn't that cool? I love that, because really what you're doing as a leader is you're looking at your staff and you're going, if I'm going to deploy you in the best way, I want to multiply your brain power, but I also want to multiply your strength. And I want you to know how smart and how brilliant you are at specific things. And when that starts to happen, amazing things come as a result. So, the question for you, specific to this particular event and this time, is how are you seeking, harnessing, and leveraging the unique abilities of your staff, your vendors, and your partners? And I think it's a critically important question. I think it's critical that with your vendors, not just your staff, but with your vendors, the people who are serving you, asking them and trying to figure out what is the unique strength, capability, and stuff that they can bring to your situation to make you better, to get you what you want, to get you the result you want. Are you doing that from your partners, from your investors? There is more to this than just staff. And I think that question is an important one for you to ask yourself. All right, let's move to self-leadership and mastery, the final quadrant. And the final quadrant for me, self-leadership and mastery, is a big part of leadership thinking, is a big part of leadership education, is who are you as a leader? And in this whole quadrant, some of the cluster of things are personal culture, getting coached, self-awareness, rest, character, integrity, your own development plan for where you want to go. But this one keeps showing up for me. I want to talk about briefly, or a couple of these keep showing up for me in the work I'm doing and in my own life and the people I talk to, and it's this. And I call it the $10, $100, and $1,000 an hour work. A great piece of art is composed not just of what is in the final piece, but equally as important, what is not. It is the discipline to discard what does not fit, to cut out what might have already cost days or even years of effort, that distinguishes the truly exceptional artist and marks the ideal piece of work, be it a symphony, a novel, a painting, a company, or most important of all, a life. And Jim Collins, one of the brilliant thinkers, understands that it's not just what you do, it's what you don't do. And how that helps, how I think once I get that concept, I think about it in terms of $10 an hour work, $100 an hour work, and $1,000 an hour work. And in your organization, you pay people to do $10 an hour work. Now, it might be 15, it might be 5, I don't know what your number is, but you pay people that sort of minimum entry-level wage, hourly rate to do tasks. And then you pay some other people $100 an hour. And those are maybe your management team, your more strategic salespeople, some of the people who are accomplishing and doing more profound things in your organization. And then there's $1,000 an hour work, and that's often the work that you need to be doing as a leader. And yet, when I sit and observe people and what they're doing with their lives, and when I am courageous enough to put the mirror up in my own life, what I discover is it's very easy for me to do $10 an hour work. It's seductive. It actually has this seductive quality to it. And so what I spend time doing is stuff that I shouldn't be doing. I spend time creating schedules for myself, or I spend time doing a task in my business that I pay employees to do. Now, it's not that it's the wrong thing to do, but as a leader, your best and highest use for your business is to bring $1,000 an hour work to what you do and not get pulled off. Perry Marshall, if you act like your time is worth $1,000 an hour, sooner or later reality will catch up, but you must be ruthless about it. This will offend other people, but you must not let their immaturity or petty demands stand in your way. You have important work to do. Don't get suckered into doing stuff that just is ineffective for you to be doing. And so the question I think for you is, where are you getting seduced into $10 an hour tasks? Tasks that really don't build your organization. They don't build your team. $10 an hour work is work that must be done in your organization. And it's seductive because you actually feel like you're accomplishing something. How many of you in this room find it sometimes very easy to, all of a sudden you're pulling your desk apart, and now you've got computers out and you're trying to figure out how to fix the connections on your PC or on your computer. And you spend an inordinate amount of time, you realize after a certain period of time, I shouldn't have been doing that in the first place. I just wasted the last 2 hours fiddling with stuff that I shouldn't have been. What do you have to do to delegate or outsource those kind of things? Now, I recognize there's times you have to dig in and do it. But in general, as you look at your life on a day-to-day basis, are you doing $10, $100, or $1,000 an hour work? Finally, as it relates to self-leadership and mastery, there's one other thing in the quadrant of self-leadership and mastery that I want to talk to you about outside of the cluster of ones we've already talked about, and that is telling yourself the truth. I believe a lot of our business problems are just personal problems in disguise. A lot of our business problems are personal problems in disguise. Max Dupree, who wrote Leadership Jazz, said, "We cannot become what we need to be by remaining what we are." As a leader, you cannot afford to stay with where you are in order to accomplish the next thing. I don't know if you've heard this statement, but what gets you to $1 million in revenue is not what will get you to 5. What gets you to 5 will not get you to 10. You have to continue to grow and evolve as a leader. What allows you to lead a team of 10 people is not what will allow you to lead a division of a few hundred. You have to become different. But one of the problems that we have, I think, is we fail to tell ourselves the truth about what's going on. And yet what becomes evident is if you look at your business, or your business is looked at with a critical eye by somebody who's not invested in it or somebody who's not emotionally connected to it, what you discover is the things that you're doing as a leader are creating roadblocks for you or your staff because of how you think and because of how you operate. Carl Jung, the famous psychologist, said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So what happens is you're not even sure of what's going on, and what happens is your staff reacts negatively. You get negative reactions, and it's easy for you to say it's your staff. From the notes that I took from Liz Wiseman this morning, when she talked about what were they called? The diminishers. Empire builders, tyrants, create stress that stops thinking. The know-it-all. I love when she talked about that. You tell people what to do all the time. One of the things that I don't think we realize is when we do that and even why we do that. And there are times that that's what's blocking you from progressing forward. So you need some mechanism in your life to actually become aware of what's going on and why you might, as the individual, as the leader, be blocking progress. Sheryl Sandberg said, we cannot change what we are not aware of, and once we're aware, we cannot help but change it. Daniel Kahneman, who just wrote a really good book called Thinking Fast and Slow, said this: our comforting conviction that the world makes sense rests on a secure foundation, our almost unlimited ability to ignore our ignorance. And it's very easy for us to not see what we need to see and not be aware of it. So to me, how do you find that out? How do you figure out what's the thing that's holding us back that could be about you? And to me, it's always about what are the walls that you keep hitting? What are the things that just keep frustrating you? And you recognize in your staff that they're just not selling, they're just not selling, they're just not selling. You have staff turnover, and you keep having staff turnover. Or you've got no new clients on a regular basis. If there is something that keeps showing up for you, that keeps bothering you and bugging you, and there's not a logical explanation for it, that's when the mirror needs to show up. When something doesn't work perpetually for you, when you keep hitting a wall, those are the kind of things that are great indicators, logic aside, because you could have trained it out of people, you could have done all kinds of things, but you keep hitting a wall. It's then that you have to ask yourself the question, what am I not telling the truth about myself here? Where am I not telling myself the truth? What am I avoiding looking at that could be painful to look at, but I need to? And then what are you doing about it? Here's the interesting thing to me. This quadrant, the lower left quadrant, the purple quadrant about you, has this kind of sneaky influence on all the other ones. If you don't have you figured out, what starts happening is strategy and the big leadership questions of where are we going, the vision we have can be affected. It can affect the way you manage things and the way you execute things. It can also affect how you affect your people and how you deploy and develop them. And if you don't look at that, then it's important that that section, this you that comes to leadership, is effective. So, as we conclude, we got these 4 quadrants. I want you to do one self-analysis thing as we end. If you look at your world in terms of 100%, you only have 100% of your time in your business life, and just in your own way of thinking, how much time or how much of your time and energy goes into each of those 4 quadrants? Objectives and strategy, how you think about where you're going. What's the big vision? What are you trying to accomplish in the world, in your business? The numbers you're trying to reach. Execution and management. How much time do you spend there? The operational aspects of your business. How much time do you spend developing and deploying other people? And then finally, how much time do you spend on self-leadership and mastery? This is called meta, and really what you're doing is you're looking at a structure and you're kind of standing outside of it, but looking down on it and assessing yourself based on that. But how much time do you spend there? What's your leadership distribution? And what's interesting, I find this one shows up a lot, is a lot of people spend an inordinate amount of their time dealing in operationally focused things. Spend all the time. And it's not wrong to spend time there, but if you're going to be an effective leader, it's really important that you expand your capacity in some of these different areas. So the question is, what are you going to do to change it? How are you going to grow your objectives and strategy capabilities? How are you going to grow and improve your self-leadership and mastery? What are you going to do to develop and deploy others in a much more effective way? That's the kind of question you have to ask as you go forward and as you think about leadership in your business and in your life. To conclude, I think it's appropriate to also say this. If you think you're leading and no one's following, you're only taking a walk. And so I hope that as you lead your business, as I hope that as you engage in your world in an effective leadership way, that you'll see the results that you want to achieve and do so in really magnificent ways. I hope that's been helpful. I hope you feel sharpened a little bit. And I hope that your success going forward will continue to be pretty amazing. Thanks for spending this time with me. If you have medical waste questions, I'm here for you. Thank you.